Out of the mouths of babes. I'll tell you situations that happened recently that kind of made me giggle. And this has to primarily do with children and gender and all of that fun stuff. So anyways, I was driving my husband's truck today. And I was going to do some donations, and I wasn't too far out of my own neighborhood, and it's very quiet. The roads are primarily very empty. You'd see a couple of cars here and there, but we live in a very rural area. So I'm driving, and I see a dad running, and he has his three littles with him, and they're on bikes, and they're all cruising along, and I was really excited to see them, and I kind of pulled up next to him, and I said, "You're an awesome dad." And he said, "Thanks." And I said, "Yeah, I was on a bike ride with a little girl recently, and we kind of went pretty far." And he said, "That's really cool." And he had two sons and a daughter. His youngest was 4, and that little guy had a really cool helmet on, and he said, "Boys drive trucks." I said, "Oh, okay, that's cool, you know." I said, his dad said, "No, girls drive trucks too." And I said, "Yeah, I drove a truck in the military." So his dad said, "Thanks." So it wasn't just an innocent statement from a little boy who think boys drive trucks, and that's cool, whatever. And then I was around a little girl, and her family's going through just stuff, and so she has an aunt who is now an uncle. Not fully transitioned, but whatever. So we were hanging out the other day, and I said, "How's your aunt doing?" She goes, "Fine, but she's transitioning." And this is coming from a 6-year-old girl. And I said, "How do you feel about that?" She goes, "Well, it's really weird." And I said, "Yeah," I said, I said, "How would you feel if me being a girl?" I said, "Well, I was a kitty." And she said, "Ah." And I said, "Exactly." I said, "It's certainly different." But as you can see, these are children. And I think it's really, I'm quite baffled about why we as adults have been not just talking about Santa, but about fiction. It's fiction. About things that just aren't true. And it's one thing to play into the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy and all that, but when it comes to gender, when a child looks at his or her, parts, their hands, or whatever's in their pants, that's all they see. And so when you as an adult are kind of talking about not really being A-okay with the parts you were born with, and you kind of force your viewpoints onto a child who, the kid just wants to be a Toys R Us kid, it really is quite something. So I didn't dispute what any of these kids said. I just thought, well, that's how they feel, and that's just that. So anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about. That's all she wrote, and I will be back.